Good evening. I'm Janice Ferguson, okay? And if you notice the puffiness here, that's my dental surgeon. He says I have a small mouth, so there's a little bit of swelling. Anyone who says Janice Ferguson has a small mouth, no way. All right, it's my pleasure to introduce Bill. I used to ride my horse through his mom and dad's property across the road, so been a lot of years, okay. At the Chicago 1893 World Fair, 5 Zorra farmers won the World Championship tug of war, and they defeated teams from Europe and from the US.
Yay.
Sounds good, eh? The victory of these mighty men of Zorra is celebrated still in the township of Zorra. For example, the Zorra Caledonia Society hosts the Embro Highland Games, and they erected a cairn outside the cemetery north of Embro, and 4 of the 5 are buried in the cemetery. The Caledonians also have held church services in their memory, featured a story at the St. Andrew's Night Banquet, hold memorial tug of war all the time, and the mighty men of Zorra have a display in the arena lobby in Embro as well. Others who have kept the story alive include several local authors, the Beachville District Museum, the Beachville District Historical Society Heritage Committee. That's a long word, but the Heritage Committee did a presentation at an historical day in the Ingersoll Public Library. The mighty men of Zorra will see another milestone this March when the Embro Theatre has engaged Bill to have a playwright. He's our speaker for tonight. Bill has written for CBC television and drama and published articles in Canada, US, Europe, Africa, Asia, and his partner, Karen, they both worked with the United Church of Canada for over 15 years, in 15 countries from 1998 to 2011, based in Angola, Mozambique. Bill's communication work there included community journalism, website designs, productions of video and music for and about young people, which explored such problems as HIV, poverty, crime, drugs, domestic violence. He also was involved in flood and drought relief. 7 of Bill's plays have been produced in Oxford County, all based on local topics, including was The Black Bearded Barbarian regarding George Leslie Mackay, 19th century, missionary work in Taiwan. Miss Supertest, the Bob Hayward story about a Zorra Township unlimited powerboat racer who became a Canadian hero. In case Bill forgets to mention it, the mighty men of Zorra will be presenting their theater presentation starting with March 20th, and we will have tickets available out in the baseball room at the end of the presentation. So, Bill, I leave it up to you.
Real quickly, just want to check and make sure we are recording. We are good.
Can we adjust the lights? There's a reflection on the screen, if it's possible.
Thank you, Janice. Is this turned on?
Yeah.
Is
Pull
it?
it up a bit.
Maybe not?
There.
Get closer? How's that? Does it actually work? Doesn't sound like it's working.
It's not on. It's
Not on.
Microphone's not working. Let me.
Work, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm messing up my job. Okay, give it a test.
Thank you.
No.
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 You know, I worked for 12 years in Africa, never had a microphone problem.
I think we're good now.
We good? That sounds better,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Brooklyn, and thank you, Janice. The Mighty Men of Zorra. After we did Miss Supertest 2 or 3 years ago, some people said, well, you know, there were other world champions from Zorra. and those were the Mighty Men. And I already knew that. In fact, I think I did a presentation in grade 8 when I was in Central School about the Mighty Men. I couldn't find it, but it sticks in my mind that I, you know, you had to do presentations then, and so we did. So when people said we could do a play, I thought, well, I know who they are, but I'm not sure that we could do an hour-and-a-half play about a bunch of big men pulling a rope. I just didn't think it was possible. But, you know, when people say, we really think that would be a great play, you don't say, no, that's a stupid idea. You say, we can make that happen. So I started looking into more about the Mighty Men because what I knew in grade 8 just wasn't going to be enough. And most of what you need is right here in the Beach Film Museum. And they've been very helpful. They're still helpful digging up things that we're going to need for the play. Tug of War, if you've been to the Embro Highland Games or any other Highland Games, you know, is still going strong. And it's still a thing. It's still an event. And in a lot of ways, it hasn't changed since the first tug of wars that I read about, which were Greek Olympics. And I don't mean like in 1902 when they started. I mean from like 800 BC. They've been pulling on ropes since then. And when I first started watching it on YouTube and so on for research, I realized people are still pulling ropes and are still watching it. There's I think it's a Korean show on Netflix called Squid Game, and they had an episode where two teams had to do a tug of war, but they're on a bridge, and the bridge stops in the middle, so there's this huge gap in the middle. And it's not a comedy. One team gets pulled right through, so it's still current. It's still current. It's still known. And in the 19th century, it was certainly huge. One of the things when I started looking into not just tug of war, but what we call the Mighty Men, is that they were very, very unusual in a way. When we were working on Bob Hayward, we realized here's a person who from the time he was a kid was interested in speed and going and being the fastest person in the world in whatever vehicle he was in, whether it was a 39 Chevy Coupe or a dragster or Miss Super Test. And George Leslie Mackay was absolutely driven, exclusively dedicated to his mission. But these guys, they weren't. They were farmers. That was good enough for them. It's good enough for anybody as far as I'm concerned. And they didn't spend their lives driven and working 18 hours a day practicing to become world champions. It's just something they did. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized if it hadn't been for James Sutherland, who was a member of the National Parliament and a tycoon who helped invent acetylene in collaboration with Carbide Wilson, whose house is still, as far as I know, the biggest in Woodstock, and who was very active in Gaelic societies all over North America. If it hadn't been for him, they probably would have just stayed winning tug of wars against Durham and Tilsonburg, and, because that was enough for them. It was a game for them. They weren't driven. And when we think of sports heroes, we think of driven people, type A personalities. When we look at the Olympics, we don't think these are people who, you know, as soon as they're back home from Milan, they're going back to their farms. No, they all want sponsorships and endorsements. And it was really fun when we started to work on a play, because a play has to have conflict, to realize that the main conflict wasn't really between the Mighty Men and the other teams they faced over their careers. It was between the Mighty Men and this politician and Celtic expert who wanted them to go and be in another race, another one, and go all the way to the World's Fair. And they were just happy to stay home. And he would say, well, the World's Fair, it's in the summer. And they would say, well, no, we've got hay, corn's getting ripe, who's gonna milk the cows? So it was really quite funny. They're very unusual international champion athletes. But it was a political thing too. Now, I suppose, if there was some group of people who could go to the States and win a world championship and beat the Americans on the 4th of July in Chicago, every politician in Canada would think that's a great idea. And I guess it would be. But these guys were different. Well, as I said, we found that you couldn't write for an hour and a half play just about pulling on a rope. It's not dramatic, you're just pulling a rope. So we decided we would look at, why were the Mighty Men the Mighty Men? Why were they from here? Why weren't they from Lucknow? Why weren't they from Cape Breton? Why were they from here? And it had to be something about the community and the culture and the economy and the ethos of this place. So we started looking at, well, what sort of people were they? How did they grow up? What kind of backgrounds did they have? They're pioneers, for a start. And we looked at, what does that mean? Well, most of them coming from northern Scotland, where there wasn't a tree to be seen that was any taller than I am. And suddenly they're here where you've got, maple and beech that are 80 feet high. And they had absolutely zero experience with building with that sort of thing. And when you look at the first houses they built, they were pretty pathetic. Because they're starting from nothing. And I think that helped make them what they are. Well, can we go win a tug of war? Well, I don't know. Let's give it a shot. Never done this before. What's this? This is a rope? Well, let's figure out how to make this work. And they did it. And then we realized, well, okay, we could start a play with them and their family as pioneers coming here. But then we realized we still got an hour and a half to fill up, so we went even earlier. And we realized that here in the Beach Film Museum, it's full of limestone fossils and things, so we started back with fossils. And it's fascinating, it really is. And what the fossils have to do with the Mighty Men, I'm not going to tell you, except they do. When the cast and crew found out that I was supposed to be speaking here tonight, they said, well, don't give the play away. And I said, well, I got to tell them something. And they said, no, okay, but be careful what you tell them. So I'll tell you we have fossils, but I won't tell you why we have fossils. And I won't tell you that actors play fossils. Oh, I guess I just did. We wanted to include the indigenous history here too, because we think that's important. The settlers wouldn't even survived if it hadn't been for the example of their predecessors. But we very quickly realized that in the culture as it is now, without an indigenous writer and some indigenous actors, we can't include indigenous history in this play. So Rick Montgomery's book will have to be another play. But we do have pioneers, and we do have barn builders. And then we realized, well, these were Zorra, Highland, according to people like John Strawn, lowlifes. These were not, according to John Strawn, according to John Strawn, right? According to John Strawn, the people who ran the country when the Mighty Men were children They were rural nobodies. They were. And I think there's still a common dynamic where, there's a group from Toronto who think that they're elite to run the province, and people out in the boonies, who are they? Maybe we haven't changed so much. So that's part of it too. Because they're from a very distinct but not highly recognized culture, that helped define what they were. And you know what? I think they didn't care what Toronto thought. So we had fun looking into the history of Zorra and how it might have helped the Mighty Men be what they are. There's some books by Elaine Kugler that tell you a bit about the loyalist time here. The Mighty Men weren't loyalists in a strict sense, but there's a couple scenes where you realize that the people who settled here, the loyalists as well as the Highland Zorra Scots, had their issues with Toronto, let's put it that way. Another thing that made them what they were was their religion. It was Presbyterian, and that was the most fearsome looking Presbyterian 19th century elder I could find. But I looked into theology, and it all goes back to a Scottish pastor named Thomas Boston. And if you read that basic early 19th century Presbyterian theology, it is fearsome stuff. It is as rigorous and disciplined and no nonsense as you can imagine. And I think that sense of discipline, here's what's right, here's how you do things, and if you don't, there's big trouble waiting down there, I think was a big part of what made the Mighty Men what they were too. They had a really strong ethical sense. I don't mean that they believed everything the preachers were telling them, but they had a strong sense of what was appropriate and what was important. And so when they got pulling on that rope, there was no question in their mind, this is what matters. Once you put the rope down, it doesn't matter at all. But while we're holding that rope, there's nothing in the world more important than doing our duty and pulling. Another thing we realized that made them what they were, that's in the play, is their schools. Schools now are different from what they were when I was 8, 10, 12, 6, 4. And that's not just because I'm old, it's because things have changed. Well, when you think of how much more things have changed between now and 1850 composed to 1950, it's astonishing. Again, there was a sense of discipline, a sense of, here's your job. You've got a job. You learn this. That also, I think, transposed into when you're on a rope. You've got a job here, and you've got people who depend on you. And I think that kind of ethic they absorbed in school. So we've got a couple of school scenes as well. By the way, there's a scene with the Oxford County school superintendent, whose name was William Carlisle. And he was the father of Florence Carlisle. We couldn't manage to get Florence Carlisle into the play, but we got her father in.
Right.
And then there was this guy, and he shows up in the play. And his name is, well, his real name is Charles Gordon, Ralph Connor. And he lived in Zorra, Harrington area when his father was a minister. Then he became a minister. Then he became huge. He sold millions of books. So we looked in and found a book set in Zorra when he lived here, about the time when the Mighty Men were children. His books were sold all over North America in the hundreds of thousands. This is back when hardly anybody could read. And we found one called The Doctor, which is set in Harrington. And it's a great book. He had to change his writing name to Ralph Connor because when you look into his books, the scandal that would have been created if he'd written them with the name of a Presbyterian minister would have been career-ending. They're really quite salacious. They are. And of course, those are the scenes that we put into the play. There's a great, I think we got 2 love scenes set at Harrington Pond. Some of the oral research that we did talking about people revealed that a lot went on at Harrington Pond that maybe Ralph Connor wasn't really fictionalizing at all. So that's in the play. And what's it got to do with the Mighty Men? I'll go back to what the cast and crew said. Don't tell them everything. Come and see. Then there was another person contemporary with the Mighty Men, who was this guy. And his name is Winsor Mackay. Have you heard of Winsor Mackay? Mark Murray put him on to Winsor Mackay. He was the inventor, pretty well, of animated film. Back in the day where you drew a picture, and then you changed very slightly, maybe you moved the character's arm up 5 degrees, and you drew another picture. And then you took a picture of each one of those pictures and ran the film, and it looked like these animated characters were moving. Well, he was born here, almost a stone's throw from this museum. And that's been genealogically proven. There was some doubt about that, but it's been proven. And he was a celebrity in the States. At the time of the tug of war in 1893 at the World's Fair, he was drawing posters and newspaper editorial cartoons for William Randolph Hearst and comic strips, and just starting to get into drawing the kind of drawings that could be filmed to become animated one. And he had a very famous character named Gertie, who was a dinosaur. A wonderful character, she's great. And he made millions. He was huge. Let's see, there he is. That's him, and he's got some of his the papers, and he's handing them off to be filmed, and here's Gertie. This was done about 1900, very early. So he did a vaudeville show where he would show his Gertie slides and show some of the 10,000 drawings that it took to make 10 minutes of cartoons. And because these are all in public domain now, we put a better show. And again, what's it got to do with the Mighty Men? They said, don't tell you, but it's relevant, and you'll know if you come to the show, and if not, well, too bad. So the Mighty Men, we eventually do get to the Mighty Men in the show, just as I am in this talk again. The first time they were persuaded to go farther afield than Durham and Tillsonburg was to Buffalo, where they faced a team from Rochester, and they didn't want to go. They didn't want to cross the border. This play is so topical now. They weren't at home there. And they didn't think much of Rochester because that's where Kodak was, and they thought the Kodak machines were mostly used to make dirty pictures. So that hasn't changed too much. But they went there, and they went in about 2 minutes, and they said, we're not going back. We went all that way for 2 minutes. The next time they were invited to Chicago, not for the World's Fair, but for another event. And the Americans changed the rules at the last minute. And the Mighty Men were very indignant and said, we're not coming back here. These guys make up things. It got spooky trying to make this play these days. It really did. So they said, look, come back. We'll talk with you again. It'll have to be in Embro at Matheson Park, but we can trust each other. So they beat there, and then they were invited back to Chicago for the World's Fair. And it's really hard for me to describe what a big deal this World's Fair was. I mean, we have World's Fairs every few years now. But this was huge. Chicago was the biggest city in the U.S. The economy was massive, mostly based on livestock and railway. But what they put together was, by modern standards, astonishing. And one of the most difficult things, and fun things really, in putting this play together is try to recreate a World's Fair that covered several hundred acres of buildings. And there's another shot of it. It took years to build. It had the first Ferris wheel, and this isn't the things you see at, the fairgrounds in Woodstock on whenever it is. When do they come? May 24? This is a huge thing. Instead of just a little thing that two people could sit in, it was a railway car. Each one was a railway car. So the Mighty Men said, okay, we'll go as long as you can get somebody to milk our cows while we're gone. And off they went to the Chicago World's Fair. And as they say in the play, well, one of them had never been south of Thistlesburg before. And suddenly they're in Chicago. And there's a lot of comedy because some of these things they weren't so sure about. I mean, this huge Ferris wheel, one of them said, I wasn't going up in that thing. That's taller than the Methodist steeple in Embro. Another guy said, not going there. I won't go any higher than my hayloft. And when they got to some of the sideshow things, their reactions were quite comical. They saw some movies, and they saw some more Windsor Mackay. This one's called Bug Vaudeville. I've just excerpted about half a minute of these. They were all about 8 or 10 minutes originally. And again, it's all done hand-drawn. It would take hundreds of drawings to get just this little clip that we've shown here. He was very inventive. Buffalo Bill, Cody had a show there. But the Mighty Men said, well, why do we have to come to Chicago to see Cody? We could see those in Embro. So they weren't impressed. They also weren't impressed with Chicago. I mean, once you got away from the fair, it was a pretty slummy city. So I loved seeing them at the Chicago World's Fair because they weren't that impressed. They were there to pull in a rope and get back home because it was hang time. And they did. So there's a lot that's kind of funny about what they did as well as kind of endearing, I think. We got a lot of songs in this show. I think there's 8 places where they're singing with original lyrics and or original music, but period kind of music, Victorian kind of popular music. when the show goes to so many different places and covers so many different periods, you can't have one single set. So it's the kind of play where there's a bunch of chairs. That's all you need. There's nothing you can't do with a bunch of chairs. I didn't bring too many shots of rehearsal because we only started a month ago and 3 of the rehearsals were snowed away. But we'll be ready by March 20th. Here, they're about to build a cabin, and they use chairs to build a barn. There's this famous scene of the Mighty Men, which is also on the table over there, which we recreated. There's the actors assuming the position. In the extreme left, you can see the camera. It's the same camera that we used in the Super Test. It was a CFPL TV then. Now it's a Woodstock Sentinel review camera to create that image. A lot of people have been saying, how are you going to do tug of war on stage? You've got 5 men, and there's the 5 mighty men. 4 of them are men. And we've got the rope there. But people said, well, how can you have 10 people on that stage pulling on a rope? Again, the actor said, don't show them how we do it. So off stage, you don't see the other team. But I decided, heck with them, I'm going to show you. So that's what the other side looks like. It's a wheel. It's a big wheel made, I think, by Don Hilborn. And it's got a winch system, a gear system, so that one person, and you can sort of see her behind the wheel there, can pull on the rope and out-pull the 5 men on the other end. It's really cool. Also, it's got lights on it, and it becomes the Ferris wheel. So it's quite an ingenious thing. It sits on the stage for the whole show, and I'm sure people are going to wonder, what is this thing? And what is it doing there? Well, I just had to show it to you because it's just so exciting. So it's a challenge to do a play about the Mighty Men. Beachville has certainly helped with equipment and research material, and the Zorra Heritage Group has helped because they're the ones who said, you know what, there's 270 famous people we've identified, and that gave me license. Okay, we're going to put at least 3 or 4 of them. We're going to put Winsor Mackay in there. We're going to put William Carlisle in there. We're going to put a couple of pastors in there, and a couple of school teachers, and a couple of fossils. We got the idea from the Zorra Heritage Group and their 270 famous people. We didn't use up all 270. We could make stories and plays about the history of this place for 270 years and not finish them all. But I think it's been exciting to work in this show. We're a month and more from opening, but I think it's going to be quite a surprise, and it's certainly been a surprise to me. Every rehearsal, you never know what you're going to get, but that's theater, and I hope you come and see it. Thanks for coming here tonight. If you have any questions, maybe I have an answer.
Maybe. Wow. All right.
Are there any tactics or tricks to pulling a rope, or are they just amazed me? I've done that, but you just pull on until you bust.
Apparently there's a lot to it. At our next rehearsal, which is,
Sunday.
tomorrow, is it tomorrow?
Yeah.
Tomorrow, we've got a special tug of war coach coming, who's going to coach the people, so they don't just stand there. No, they can't actually be doing what a real tug of war person would do, or they'd all be in hospital before they got home at night. But they're going to learn how to make it look more realistic. And there's a lot to do with how you set your feet, where you place your arms, the angle that you place yourself on, when you pull and how you pull, when you back off, and how and why you back off, based on the tension you're getting from the other side. I interviewed a couple of people who do it. There's a lot more to it than just, oh, it's quite scientific.
That was our methodology, yeah.
Yeah, that's basically what it is, but there's a lot of technique to it. And of course, that's developed over the years, just as technique has in any sports. And the equipment has changed too, the shoes and so on. So we won't be able to be absolutely realistic about how a tug of war would be done, or even how it would have been done then, because it's too dangerous, really. But we're going to make it look a little bit more like how it actually would have been done.
Was there a monetary reward at the end of, like to the 5 guys, or was it just a ribbon to say that they were the strongest guys, or?
They got a trophy,
Oh, okay.
and they got a free first-class trip back to Zorra, and they didn't do it for the trophy. They did it because they wanted to do the best they could at what they're being asked to do, I think, and this is what they were called. It was their mission, I guess. They've been asked to do this. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do the best we can, and it's not about trophies and money. Although there's a wonderful replica of the trophy over at the community center.
Where's the real one? Gone?
It's in the Woodstock Museum.
They
The
won't
real
let us
one,
have
the real
it for
one.
the show.
But there's a duplicate that I think we have to use in the show. But yeah, the original's in the Woodstock Museum.
How did those men get around from city to city, country to country, and who sponsored them?
A lot of it was local community donations, if you like. The North American Celtic Society was sponsoring too. James Sutherland, who was the captain and really the promoter of it all, was extremely wealthy as the co-inventor of acetylene. And he chipped in an awful lot of his own money.
Because he must have gone away for a couple of weeks sometimes, all the way to Chicago.
Yeah,
You don't do that overnight.
yeah, and
They have to pay for lodging.
so they had free accommodation. James Sutherland, the tycoon who was also their captain, was on the Federal Parliamentary Railway Committee and on the board of the Toronto Hamilton Buffalo Railroad, TH&B, which the Mighty Men said meant to Hickson and back. And it was all sponsored. They still didn't like the idea because they said, yeah, okay, so this is all free for us and we get a trophy at the end, but who's gonna milk the cows? Right? They said, you get that with a ticket? So all that had to be managed too. That's the way Canadian athletes are. You have to run your job. Yeah.
So what was the average weight of the Zorra guys versus the other teams that are pulling against the weight?
They varied between about 235 and 190, 185. They were often pulling against heavier people than that. But as their captain says, these are guys who've been chopping wood and managing hay bales and doing all these farm things. The people they're pulling against were often urban, they were police people or something like that. And I think there's people who were Zorra farmers before farming was mechanized, had the strength to outpull people more than their weight. One of them, it was known, he would go to the Emerald Fair and outpull a horse with Clydesdale was.
Oh my gosh.
So, I mean,
Did they just do it once, like one time of
so
work?
they were not just, well, they were good size, but they were also strong.
Yeah.
Just strong in every single muscle.
And how many years were they polling?
How many
till
years?
they got that far?
Well, the first international competition they had was about 10 years before the last one. And by the time of the last one, the oldest of them was 53 years old. I mean, pulling against people half that age and pulling them right over. So, I mean, it's not that they spent obsessive hours at Good Life Fitness. It's just they were farmers and doing farm work and staying fit. They didn't have to exercise anymore. Now, they didn't need any more weight than what they had, so the average would have been not much over 200 pounds.
Did you have some kind of a trainer to help them out, how to do it?
Yes, the captain sort of gives it, he calls, the captain calls. But pretty well, it turned out they knew exactly from tensions on the rope and from watching the other side, when was the time to grab your second, make that pull because those guys are on their last. So yes, they had a captain, but in practice, they knew perfectly well when their second would be, when their moment to give that extra grab, they were just holding in reserve.
So they trained for many years before they got that far, till they got the world champion.
Well, they've been doing it, but just for fun,
How many years were they training?
since they were kids. Everybody was doing that since they were kids, but not practicing, it's just something you did whenever,
Fair or
whenever you
something.
wanted.
The church picnic.
They were amateurs in the literal sense of doing it because they loved doing it. So when the politician comes along and says, we're gonna go do this internationally and through the name of Canada, they said, nah, that's not why we do this. So they've been doing it for years, because it was just part of the culture here. That's just what people did.
There's a lot of milking to be given to neighbors.
Yeah.
Yes, the whole community is
That's a
behind
different
it.
technique.
Yeah.
Yeah, to talk them into,
Yeah.
Sure, because they said, who's gonna milk the cows?
Yeah.
And it was really a community thing. So that's why when they come back from these championships, there's like a 3-day blowout at Matheson Park. Keep in mind that the first 2 buildings in Embro, the very first 2, were both distilleries.
These Presbyterians, as I recall, some of them didn't like to drink. But then there was the Free Presbyterians, who were different than the Presbyterians, because they didn't like somebody else telling them who they were gonna hire for their ministers.
Well, from what I've seen, and we've got a whole scene of conflict between different Presbyterians. Well, let's start with the Mighty Men. 4 of the 5 drank, only 1 didn't.
which one?
One didn't.
Sober one.
So it was very much a part of the culture. As far as I can find out, it was the Methodists who didn't drink. It wasn't the Presbyterians. There were some who were opposed, but I think if you look at the culture, the Presbyterian culture as a whole, it was less anti-drinking than the Methodists by far.
So when you look at the photo, which one of them would have been the oldest, the youngest, the anchor?
The anchor is always the heaviest. The age, they only varied by about 8 years. They're all in their 40s at the end, except one who was 53. Their first international event, the oldest was 50, no, 48. The others were around 40. So there isn't a big difference there's maybe a 25-pound weight difference, less than 10-year difference among them. And when I look at that picture, I forget who's who.
Were any of them related?
To each other? Not that I know of. I mean, in those days, probably everybody in Zorra was related to somebody. But not in any. And one of them was English, it wasn't even Scottish at all. But still an equal member of the team. Anything else? All I can say is, it's a great story. I had no idea Tug of War could be so much fun. and that it would draw in so much else about Zorra history. Right back to fossils. Thank you all very much for your interest.
Well, Bill, thank you very much. I think that the play is going to be quite exciting to see.
We'll see.
Oh, well,